second.
Hey Airsofters, in this video I'm going to be walking you through how to take apart, clean, and lubricate the PTS EP magazine. The reason why I'm doing this is, and I'm talking about a full breakdown, the reason why I'm doing this is everything was working great. I live in Central Oregon. It's a high desert, dry climate, and I took my gear to the coast to go shooting, and for some reason the magazines would only load about halfway, and when they get kind of jammed up, they're hard to put more BBs into, and consequently they wouldn't feed into the gun without really banging it, tapping it. Since I got back to Central Oregon, things have been a little bit better, but ultimately I'm still not, I don't really know what happened. I didn't use different BBs. They've been stored in a gun case, so I'm not too sure exactly what's happened. But what I'm going to do now is take the entire magazine down to all the different components. I'm going to clean it up, lubricate it, put it back together. I'm going to walk you through how to do that now. So we'll go ahead and get started. If you remember from my last video, first step's really easy. What you're going to want to do is remove this internal mechanism from the external frame, and really simple, easy to do. At the bottom here, there's this little, it doesn't look like much, but it's actually a little button. You can push on that button and slide that bottom piece off just like that, okay? That's step one. Now there's a screw down in here, and I've already taken it off just for the sake of time. So you unscrew that, and once you've got that unscrewed, you push this through the bottom, out to the top, okay? So just like the last video, or pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Now what you have here is a bunch of small screws, and those are the ones that we're going to remove first. This bigger screw here is for the spring guide. Now that doesn't need to come off to pull the magazine apart. And when you pull this apart, the spring's it'll boing out, but I'll show you how to put it all back together really easily. Rather than have you watch me do this, what I'm going to do now is remove all these little screws. I'll do that now, take that apart, and I'll come back. I do the outside if it matters. I don't think it does, but I do the outside first and then the three middle ones. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then when I've got that all done, I'll come back and show you the next steps. Alright, so I've got all the small screws taken out, and I'm holding the magazine together with pressure. It won't pop open or anything, but I'm just holding it so I can show you guys the steps. A few things to note before we move on to the next thing, which is opening this up. You'll notice down here I've got all the same length screws and then two little screws. Those two little screws go right here and right here. So when you put it back together, make sure you're not trying to put a long screw in those two. The short ones go on the outside of this long section. All the other screws are the same. So a couple other things to note besides the screws. When you pull this thing apart, the top's going to be one piece. You don't have to worry about that too much. But down here, you've got these two little springs that operate this button. And also, if you can see, you've got inside here, and it's kind of hard to see, this is the screw that the bottom plate, well, excuse me, this piece screws into. So when you pull this apart, that's just a little free nut in there, and that'll often, a lot of times, fly out. This sometimes will pop out too. It's best to wear eye protection. None of this stuff's going to take your eye out except for the big spring, but we're going to take it apart so it doesn't, we don't have to worry about that too much. When you pull this thing apart, you'll see that this will have a tendency to fall out, and this may pop out. But we'll go ahead and do that now. And the spring is going to work itself out. Don't worry about that, because we'll be able to put it back in pretty easily. And I use a little flathead to kind of work this open a little bit. Okay. So you notice this popped out, and usually the springs, based on my experience, those two springs stay in, so you want to leave those in just like that. You guys can see those two, okay? And then you'll also notice that little guy's free floating. So I'm just gonna pop that out, put that up here. Now the top piece, the spring's fine now at this point, there's not a lot of pressure on it. This piece right here, we're just gonna pull this apart gently, and the spring's gonna fall. That's fine. Take it off the spring guide, just let that rest. You don't want to bend it or twist it. You want to keep it nice and loose so you don't put any kinks in that spring. So now I've got this piece with a spring guide here, and this piece again just slides off like that. There's little guides right here that this will slide back onto. One other gotcha is if you pull this back, there's a little spring in here, and you're going to want to make sure that you don't pull this back, otherwise that spring will pop out. So don't mess around with this when this is out. It'll stay in just fine as long as you don't touch it. Okay, now that I got it apart, there's one last step to get all the pieces apart, and that is to remove this spring guide. It's a little bit different size screw head, so I use a little bit bigger. That was a good catch. A little bit bigger screw head. I'm just going to take that off now, and I'll show you guys how to pop this out as well. So again, as a reminder, the reason why I was doing this is it wasn't loading properly, and therefore it wasn't feeding into the gun properly. And there's no good reason for it. I'm not too sure, but maybe it's the humidity and moisture at the coast versus being here in a high desert environment and it being dry. But anyways, so now I've got the spring out, and that just ends up pushing through like that and out. And you'll note this has a bit of a curvature to it, and you'll need to know that when you put it back in because it's got a slight curve. It won't go in any other way, but just for sake of time. Okay, so now you've got it all put together. Now really quickly, what was happening for me is I would load the magazine, it would get to about here, do it this way, load the magazine, and it would get to about here and stop, and I just couldn't force anything else in, and then it would jam up the spring so it wouldn't feed properly. So the purpose of doing this is to make sure there's no foreign material in here, that it's not dirty, there's no weird burrs in the track. And also what I'm going to do is put a little pure silicone oil on it, and probably maybe that way. Not too sure how this is going to show up on YouTube, but I got this off of Craigslist. This is pure silicone. It doesn't have any petroleum-based products in it, which is important because petroleum-based products will eventually start to eat away the plastics if you're not careful with it. So pure silicone, nothing but silicone. So let me get the next step set up and I'll walk you through it. Okay, as I said before, what I want to do is clean out these inside tracks here. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually take a little alcohol swab, the last one, and wipe out the inside of the track. And that's just to get rid of any existing lubrication, anything else that might be in there. Alcohol, I feel, works the best because it's dries quick, it doesn't harm plastics, and cleans really well. So this is a good way to get rid of kind of the initial stuff. Just a quick wipe down inside the tracks. If you don't have alcohol swabs and you want something different at this point, because you're just dealing with plastic, you probably use a little Simple Green, another mild cleaner or something like that, wash it off and then dry it off. But like I said, for the sake of time, I like the alcohol because it's quick drying and has a tendency to get rid of anything certainly that's sticky, breaks down anything like that. I also clean my barrel with these to start, and it seems to work pretty well. That's kind of where I got the idea. So I'm going to run through this a couple times. Okay, that's pretty good. And the other trick here, if you want to bang it out pretty fast, is get yourself some, you got an air compressor or something like that, but get yourself some compressed air and then just blow out the tracks. Can's getting a little tired. This one's probably a little better. You guys are part of this, but you can get compressed air at like Office Max or Staples or probably even Home Depot if you wanted to, but any office supply store will get you this stuff. All right. So I've got that tracks cleaned off. I'm going to do the same thing really quick to the spring guide. And to the indicator tip. And again, blow it off just so I can move on to the next step a little faster. All right, so now next step that I do. Got a Dremel tool here. I got a little buffing wheel. This is a mildly abrasive buffing wheel. It just so happens this particular buffing wheel fits perfectly inside these tracks. And I got it set to really low speed. If you got this up too high, it'll actually end up deforming the plastic. It'll actually put a little, I wouldn't say dent, but it'll wear down the plastic enough to the point where you'll really screw things up. So low speed, and what I'm gonna do is run this around the track, paying special attention to the corners, especially the tight ones. So I'll do one really quick to kind of show you how I'm doing it, and then I'll do all of it, and we'll come back to the next step. I will also buff this off. I'm looking for any sharp pieces, burrs, anything that feels kind of funky. That's what I'm looking to do. What I'm trying to do here basically is polish the inside of this and all the mechanisms that the spring runs on and the BBs run on to make this as smooth as possible. And that does include the tip here. So I'll go ahead and go around this tip as well. Some guys might use sandpaper. In my opinion, that's a little too aggressive. I'd rather go really light first, put it all back together, see if it works, and if it doesn't, maybe go back with the buffer again. But if I got a really screwed up spot or something, maybe some 1000 grit wet dry sandpaper would be good. But this has worked great so far, so I'm going to stick with it. So I'm going to go ahead and do a track really quick to show you. I'm going to do everything else, and then I'll come back. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see on this one. So I don't know if you're going to catch that or not, but there's a small, you can see there's a little bit of like where the BBs line up here, and you'll see what happens, the difference of this track, maybe, after I buff it. And you may or may not be able to see how much shinier it is. So, like I said, I'll do that all the way around and I'll come back. All right, so I've buffed out the inside. You may or may not be able to see that it's, how much shinier it is. That's what I was looking for. So I did the inside tracks here, did the spring guide, and also the indicator tip here. Now the next thing I'm going to do is blow it all out. This has a tendency to leave some fibers and stuff, so I'm going to blow everything off again. That one's toast. And then, just like I did before, I'm going to take the alcohol swab pad and run it down through the tracks one more time. And even though it's a closed system, it's pretty amazing how much crud you guys can get off of. You guys see that or not? But just dirt and stuff, and that may be enough. I'm not too sure why it was jamming up. But I've done this to the other magazines, and they seem to be feeding like they were before. Like I said, I don't know exactly what happened. And then on the indicator tip here, sometimes you can get a little, the fibers and stuff catch a little easier on the tip, so usually get that pretty good. Get that all cleaned off. Okay, feeling pretty good about that. Now, next step. What I'm going to do is take a Q-tip and some of my silicone spray, and spray this over a garbage can. Put it on the end of the Q-tip and just run it down the inside of the track. Good. Good. You don't need a whole bunch in here. You don't want a ton. You get too much in here and it'll obviously attract more dirt and things like that and kind of defeat the purpose. But I want to lubricate this entire thing. They don't come lubricated from the factory, and I'm not too sure, quite frankly, I'd even recommend this. The factory would recommend this, but because they're so easy to take apart, and I don't want a malfunctioning magazine when I'm in the field, it's worth it to me to, maybe we'll see, maybe this is the first time I've done it with my magazines just because of the feeding issue I was having, but maybe this is the once a year type of deal. We'll see. We'll see how long this ends up keeping things running smooth. Spring guide, I wouldn't worry about that too much right now because we're gonna probably put a bunch on that once we get the thing back together. And then the tip, a little bit on that. So that's pretty much it there. And I'll get the next step ready to go and be right back. All right, I got everything lubed up. And we'll note that I put a little extra in the corner, in the tight spots, a little extra lubricant. That seems to help a little bit. And there is 2 halves of this magazine, so in order to start this, putting it back together, you're gonna look for the half that has these little spring guides in them, these little bump outs here. That's compared to this, doesn't have them, it's fairly flat. So those 2 spots are where those springs go. So I'll go put those back in. There's a few different ways to do this. I found that this is the easiest way for me to do it. Grab a flathead and just compress that spring down into its spot. It's a little tricky, but just stick with it and you'll get it. So those are both in there now. Push them down a little bit, make sure they're in their home, and they are. Now this will generally stay in place if you're careful, but I like to hold on to it. Then what I'm going to do is grab that little nut. It's going to fit back in its home right there. Then I'm going to take that top piece, slide it in its little home. Then take the magazine, gently release my finger off of that. Put the whole thing back together. Boom. Okay, so now we're safe. Those aren't going to pop out. That little guy's not going to pop out. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do you put the spring back in? Well, I'll show you. First thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to grab one of these other screws just to hold the magazine together in the center. And that's just enough to keep the whole thing together. It'll still move a little bit, but you got one screw in there. Again, you don't want to tighten these up, just get them snug. You don't need to crank on them. It's plastic on plastic, right? So there. Now, the other thing, the last step that we're going to do, that I do, is grab, my wife's been in the garage, she's getting in all my stuff. She's got her little projects going on out here too. Grab one of these guys and put this down, and take the spring and gently manipulate it. There we go. That's the exciting part of the video. And again, I'm going to take some of this pure silicone spray and just, and that's it. Not a lot, don't need a lot. Now, we've got this magazine, and all we got to do is put the spring back in. Well, the easiest way to do it is to leave the spring guide out. Take your tip. Don't fight the spring, just let it find its natural home, and just slowly guide that right back in. And you'll see it's just that easy. That went in pretty well, not too bad. Now you got about this much, so you don't want to spend too much time trying to force this down in here. That's what the spring guide's for. The other thing I'm going to do too is I'm going to coat the spring guide pretty well. Wipe off there. And again, you guys remember I mentioned earlier, there's a curve to this. So again, it only goes in one way, so it's not that big a deal. And I'm going to take this spring guide and run it down through spring, and then just slowly and gently start to work that spring back in. And you get to a point where it feels like it's a little tight, but the spring ultimately gets out of the way in most cases. There we go. Now that's in, spring's in, sitting flush, spring looks good, no weird kinks. Take my set screw, or my spring guide screw rather, and I'm going to tighten that up. There we go. Again, not too tight. There you go. Now if you guys wanted to lube this up a little bit at this point, you could. Not a bad idea, since we got it. Q-tip, drop a little bit in there. Pull it back, drop a little bit in there, work it back a couple times, good to go. So now I'm basically ready to put it back together. Again, these two small screws right here, they go on the outside, right there. All the other screws are the same length. So I'll go ahead and put those all back in and come back. All right, I got it all back together. All the screws are back in and snug. One thing that I do, I think it's just because I'm anal retentive, is when I take it apart, I do the outside first, and then I finish with the middle. When I put it back together, I start with the middle, and then go around the outside. So I don't know if it makes a difference, that's just how I do it. So now we got it all put back together. I'll wipe it off. Again, no reason to have too much stuff all over it to introduce more dirt in places you don't need it or want it. Check the basic operation. Yep, that works good. That hole lines up. Then you can just take this, take your magazine, drop it in, put that screw in. Okay. That looks good there. Take your base plate, slide, push. There, one cleaned, lubricated PTS EPM magazine. So let's do a quick little check. This magazine was not feeding all the way, it was only feeding partially. So let's see if that fixed it. Put some BBs in here so I got enough. Sorry, I should have had this prepped. All right, let's see if my handiwork did it. Like I said before, to feed about halfway, and then this, I just couldn't get any more to go in. It felt like I was going to break something, so let's see what happens. So far, much better. Good to go. You see there it's full. Gets a little tough at the end, but nothing, it was better, it's better than it was. I wasn't even able to get that far around last time. So should be pretty good, I think, at this point. I'll test it out in the field. Double check this. Good to go. A small little tap there to get it started. But before I couldn't even get them to go. So I think that definitely helped. And hopefully that helped you guys. So there you have it. Pretty simple, straightforward, easy to do. Anybody can do it. So if you have any questions, post them up in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. And happy airsofting.